Welcome to our 20th AMA. Serendipitously, it's the 20th of May and it's going to be good, so please stay. So let's get started without further delay. I thought I'd make it rhyme. So
Sure.
I'm just standing in temporarily for Simon, who's a bit ill. And as I said, we're not going to delay too much. So let's get started with the next slide. So a 3.85 update. Tom.
So today's topics are, we're going to cover the update for 3.385, which has been an ongoing thing. We're going to talk a little bit about our future plans, what's happening past 3.85. Then we have a presentation by Mr. Grack in his game Laser, and then a little bit of QA. So pretty straightforward. So want to jump straight into it?
Indeed.
Oh, and
just a reminder.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, just a reminder, we obviously have our streams once a month with the AMA and Code Time on Fridays, Simon with the MonoGame University, and the monthly, well, right now, not exactly monthly, but we're hoping to get it more on track with the MonoGame Spotlight, hopefully due out next week.
Cool.
So the 3.85 release.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So this has been a long going process, getting this update done. We were talking about it the other day, and mostly the delay has been just that it was a pretty big update. We spent a lot of time trying to get the everything working. And it just took a long time to shake out all the problems. So that was something that we wanted to take some extra time and make sure that we had some stable bases for the updates that we did. So let's get into that a little bit. So right now, the 3.85 Preview 5 is soon to be live. I think it's building at the moment. Preview 5, we anticipate to be the last preview before we actually release 3.85. As the official, stable release. We encourage anybody that's interested to pull the latest preview and test it against your games. Giving us feedback on those things is really helpful because we want to catch any problems before they get out the door. So what's in this? So, Simon collected some of this information, like over 120 fixes and improvements to the core framework. A lot of things that came from just community members, not just people, working directly on the project, but just community members and just, fixes that sometimes just fix the problem that you have or scratch your itch, but it improves the framework overall. So those are always great. We love those kinds of contributions. This release also has the new content builder that Harry had spearheaded. This new content builder is basically, if you've seen our previous streams, they talk about it a little bit. It works via a CS project. So it works just like a the content project is back. The old school type of XNA content projects are back in the way of being a regular C# project that happens to build and execute before your game runs. That execution is what kicks off the pipeline and lets you hook in code to tell it how to build everything. So it's a very code-centric way of building the content, which kind of fits in with the ethos of XNA and MonoGame. So it's a really cool new thing. I believe we have documentation up for it, or some initial documentation up for it in our docs, but we'll have to check on that. But I think there's initial documentation on how to use it. So it'd be great for you guys to check it out and give us feedback on it. Again, it's still experimental. There'll probably be issues with it, but I think it's worth getting people's feedback on this so we can strengthen it for the next release, for 3.86. Also, another big thing is the Vulkan desktop platform. So the Vulkan code originally came back when we were working on Google Stadia, was where we started messing with Vulkan. And then eventually we decided to move it into the main repo and start to actually make it work. And it took a lot of iteration. We had, I believe there was one bounty that got a lot of the way there. but it took a while from that bounty. It took a while to get it fully stable and to make all our unit tests run, because the unit tests were not running fully at the beginning. There was, lots of broken tests. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been spending extra time. Actually, about a month or two ago, I started getting the Vulkan tests working, and spent more time on Vulkan tests over the last couple of weeks, and have finally gotten it where all the Vulkan unit tests pass. So it's at least as good as our unit tests are, which is a pretty good step. It's possible that there's still bugs there. That's why it's still in an experimental mode. But it is, the first attempt at having something beyond OpenGL that works for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And it works the same as the other. It's a single build. It gives you something that works across all those platforms. The other platform that was added was DirectX 12. That was important because that's what runs on Xbox exclusively. So with the DX12 update, which is another bounty that came in last year, it was pretty good, but it still has some holes in it. And we've spent some time fixing all the unit tests for that. In fact, the last PR for stabilizing the unit test just went in yesterday or this morning. So the DX12 platform is in there now with all working unit tests. So those are the major things in this update. To further test things, we've been using it with existing projects. So this is just a screenshot of the Ascent demo. Nothing super exciting, except this is the Ascent demo running under Vulkan. So being able to port it to our demos to verify that things work is, a big step in making sure it works. And there's still some bugs, and, performance-wise, it seems loading is slower. Frame rate seems about the same. It's a little slower than our DX11 implementation, even though our DX11 implementation is now, I don't know, 15 years old or something. It's a pretty old implementation. So it's been battle tested and tried. So it's very stable. And the Vulkan build is pretty close to it. So we're just going to spend a little bit more time for the 3.8.6 release. We're going to spend a little bit more time optimizing and doing some fixes so that we can get it to be on par with our old implementations.
How does it compare with the OpenGL in terms of speed, etc.?
I have not tested against OpenGL. The Ascent demo in particular has issues on OpenGL, because some of the techniques it wants to use are not compatible with the version of OpenGL that we're currently on, the older OpenGL. If we bump to the latest OpenGL, we might be able to do some more advanced techniques, and that will make that OpenGL path better. I mean,
Sure.
Can we make it work on the old OpenGL? Yes, we could. It takes some extra work. You have to basically work around the limitations of the shader language under the older OpenGL release. But that's a worthy experiment. But we'll see where we land on that. But I didn't test it against OpenGL. I know that the DX platform is the one I normally test on, and it's running 100 frames per second. The Vulkan release is running around 100 something frames per second. So it's pretty close overall. If you get the frame times, they're similar.
Sure.
But the thing that I did notice with it is that the load time for Vulkan was pretty bad, surprisingly bad. So I'm going to investigate that a little bit and see, what's happening there. It could just be because of how Vulkan works, and how Vulkan works. It has to build pipeline stages, and it does a lot of last minute building of things, and that stuff takes time. And it could be all just that. It could just be shader pipeline building, and that could be the problem. So I haven't investigated too far, but the fact that we got it running and it's running compatible with what we had with the X11, tells us that we're pretty much there. I'm in the middle of testing it against DX12 to see where we're at there. So that will have to come up for another discussion. We'll see where we're at with that. But we're happy that this is actually here. The plan still is, like the previous slide says, is, we're putting out this preview today, and we're planning to release the final 3.8.5, by the end of the month here. So in the next 2 weeks. So let's see. So that brings us to the next step, plans for 3.8.6. So one, we're going to return to quarterly releases of the framework. Basically 3.8.5, we planned quarter releases, and then 3.8.5 slipped, 3 quarters, basically. It's like 9 months behind schedule. Looking back on why that occurred, it was basically that we didn't really have a good plan for how to deal with long-term updates to the framework mixed in with short-term updates to the framework. Like, how do we deal with a long-term update that's going to take several quarters to get done versus smaller incremental fixes that, you know, are easier to get done? We didn't have a flow for that. Moving forward, we're going to focus on, you know, having, you know, quicker releases. We're going to do quarterly releases no matter what. We're planning to keep basically keep bigger fixes or bigger changes like this in a separate branch that will also be updated through NuGets, you know, and kept in sync with develop. But that will keep some bigger features that still need more time to bake before they're really ready to move into the public repo or into develop, so it can be part of a regular release. So we're going to change how we organize things a little bit, you know, which the new board members were really helpful in suggesting the path for us to take there. That's going to be how we're going to approach things moving forward. For now, for 386, because we're going to commit to quarterly releases, you know, 386 is going to be a pretty short turnaround. We're going to release it at the end of next month, at the end of June. We're just going to focus on stability and bug fixes. If there's any features that get in there, they'll be smaller features or things of opportunity. But for the most part, we're going to mostly focus on the Vulkan and DX12 backends, making it bulletproof, getting the performance up to par, so that those things are good solutions for people shipping games today, you know, on Steam and on Xbox. We're also going to focus on improving the content builder system. The content builder is still pretty new. It's experimental. There's definitely fixes to be done there. There's features that we haven't really talked about too much that are not completed yet. You know, we're going to continue to work on that and get that thing, you know, ready to basically fully replace the old MGCB path. There'll be a lot of minor feature updates and conveniences. There's some maintenance tasks that we've been needing to do. There's a PR at some point that we had that I think Harry did, or Harry was waiting on it, that basically cleans up every single warning in the build. Because not that we had a lot of problems in our builds before. The issue was that, you know, .NET has improve their strictness, and the .NET builds now spit out a lot more warnings for things. So cleaning up all those warnings to make our builds clean is pretty important. So that's a longer term maintenance thing that, you know, we want to get merged, and that's something that just has to be merged into the main branch. It's going to be pretty disruptive. We just need to get that done here as soon as we ship 385. We're going to start working on stuff like that, and all this is part of a longer roadmap towards a 389 release. So plans for 389. Really, the idea is 389's like all the major things that kind of move us into a more modern version of MonoGame. So we're going to make sure that Vulkan and DX12 are 100% solid. Those things are going to drive us on desktop for the future. You know, we plan to support Vulkan on mobile as well. That's part of the roadmap towards 389. You know, we want to fully switch over to the new content builder system and start to depreciate MGCB, maybe fully by 389. I do not know. We started a project to revamp the storage container system, which is storage container is programmer speak for save data. It used to exist in the old XNA API. We removed it long ago because it was kind of designed around, you know, how Xbox's save data worked, and that's very, very different from how save data works on consoles today. We have a project to refresh that API, so it's similar to the old storage container, but has improvements to support modern consoles, so that we can get true cross-platform save data, which is something that we run into every time we do a console port. We run into the fact that people implement save data in a million different ways that's incompatible, and we always have to fix it up. So designing a new storage container that can be used for save data, that works well for PC, for games that are moddable, for games that, you know, share save data, as well as for consoles. You know, having one system that works for all of them is pretty important. So that's part of a bigger plan for 389. There was some work that we've started on a updated video player implementation specifically for the new Vulkan and DX12 backends. That's part of our plans towards 389. You know, one thing that I've been wanting to get in there for a while that it becomes more and more apparent the more that we work on graphics issues here is getting an API in for debugging events and markers and naming for graphics elements. If you've ever done any graphics debugging, being able to assign a name to a texture so that your texture, like even the file name of the texture appearing there, so that when you go and use something like RenderDoc or any DirectX shader debugger, that you can actually tell this texture that's using, it's this texture specifically, or what is this draw call doing? Having markers around draw calls so you can tell what it's actually doing. Those are pretty critical to making debugging of graphics issues easier, and we've never had a system for that. So adding a system in for that works across the new platforms, is pretty critical. There's a giant rewrite of the shader compiler system, to kind of unify everything. Anybody that's worked on shaders and MonoGame knows that you end up spending time writing a fancy set of, preprocessor macros that kind of hide away differences between each platform. And that's really all unnecessary. It's all legacy garbage that we really don't need to support any further. So those elements are things that we plan to remove so that we have a singular way to write a shader that works across all the platforms, desktops, mobile, and consoles, so it's totally, so that it's totally unified. It makes our jobs easier when we're trying to ship to another platform that just builds and works. There's also a desire for a higher quality font system that goes beyond just the old, let me pre-render some text into a texture. I don't know exactly what path we're taking for it. There's a lot of suggestions out there, but that's another element of things that we plan to do for 3.9. So yeah, these are kind of what we're aiming towards in order to get a more modern version of MonoGame for 3.9. And beyond that, we want to do more of that in order to get us to the next level, which is starting to move away from the XNA API towards an API that, kind of handles GPUs kind of how you should handle them today. XNA is very much a single-threaded API, is not single-threaded in that you can't use another thread for like loading content or anything like that. But it isn't really designed for being able to render from multiple threads, whereas modern graphics APIs allow you to do submissions from multiple threads. And the XNA APIs are not really set up for that. So moving towards APIs like that, moving to just some more modern techniques for stuff and kind of refreshing the API is what the plans are for beyond 3.9, 4.5. So yeah, that's basically where we're at. We're happy that we finally have 3.8.5 out the door. That is, finally here, and excited about our plans for 3.8.6 and some of the other plans that we have moving forward. Anything I didn't cover, guys?
Yeah, just wanted to point out that we're not obviously getting rid of MGCB straight away until we're really happy with the new content pipeline. So just in case people are panicking out there.
Yeah, nobody needs to panic about that. End of the day, here's the good thing. With an open source project, you don't have to worry about anything going away. If we ship 3.9 and, if at that point we think, we'll start depreciating MGCB, and then we ship a 4.0 and we decide MGCB needs to move, we get removed, then you can still use 3.9. It doesn't change anything. And really, we would only make a move like that once we feel like that this new path is super solid. There's really not much difference between the two as far as functionality. It's just how it builds the content is a little different, but you can use it in lots of different ways. It's a lot more flexible than it was before. You can use it very similarly to how you did before. You're fully capable of using it in different ways. So yeah. Anything else?
Don't think so.
Cool. Well, let's then jump to the next slide. So I guess it's time for Mr. Brock.
Indeed. He's not on yet. Let's welcome him.
Hey. Can you guys hear me?
Well,
Yep.
yeah, we can. Welcome, Garrick. I hope other people are as excited to see what's the latest with laser as I am.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get started. I wasn't sure how to do this, so I was going to start at the most zoomed out view and kind of go into a slice, right? So when you make a game, you have to figure out how you're going to divide up game state. And I decided to go with screens. So this is what a screen looks like. And a screen manager. This should be pretty common. People should understand like what a stack of screens is. But what I also choose to do is make static instances of every screen. And I'll show you why I do that right now. So like, for example, I'm working on air bikes in the game and I want to test them. So I want to boot directly into a level where I'm riding on an air bike like that. So I can just test it, make sure everything's working, and then close it. And let's say I wanted to try a different level. Like, Applewood Street. Now if I build the game, it's not going to take me to the air bike screen. It's going to take me to the level screen. And I'm going to be on Applewood Street. So this allows me to jump into parts of the game really quick. So for example, if I was working on artifacts, this is just the artifact screen. So I can just sit here and focus on this and be like, does all this translate properly? You know, because you got stuff down here. I'm working on translations. And then once I check it and I'm like, okay, this works, it looks great, then I can just go back to testing this like in the full game. Right. So let's go back to level Applewood Street in a level, and I'll show you airbike screen or artifact screen right here. So that's the screen we were looking at, but it's sitting in a screen stack over the level screen now. So you kind of see how I'm only focusing on one little screen for testing and stuff like that. And that's what all these screens are. Like when we go to a fast travel screen, when we fast travel somewhere, when we look at a garage screen, we choose an air bike. This is a dialogue screen. All the dialogue happens through this screen. And this is all layered on top of the level screen as well. So not to belabor the point, but you have a lot of game state and you got to figure out how to divide it up so that you don't go crazy. So that's part one. Part one is how do we divide all this stuff up and keep it organized? And then I've already covered all that stuff. That was pretty quick. I guess we get into cloth and chain sims. Okay. If you're making a game, it's really, really useful to have a gym to do stuff in, a gym to test things out. And I want to show you guys chains and cloth right now, but I got to build a gym real quick to do that. So this is an editor that I have. I'm just going to save this level real quick and then we'll boot back into it. And you'll see I have chains I can test now, climb on them, jump around on them and stuff. I also want to show you guys cloth. So what I'm going to do is edit this level's data. You saw me edit it with the editor. Now I'm going to edit it with code, which is really what I love about MonoGame. So this is a level. What I'm going to do right here is just copy this, go into the cloth system, and we need to change some parameters real quick. Let's look into, ooh, why can't you navigate to that? You want to spawn a sheet. Yeah. So X, Y, width, height, chain type, and color. That's what we want. Width, height. I don't have autocomplete on this. I don't think I have it set up. Actually, we'll just copy this from another level. Let's do this right here. No, actually, no, we can't do that. I'm wasting time. Sorry, guys. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is that you can edit code and then you can just like build it again. And you don't always have to use like an editor. Like you can just change the code and then mess around with what you want to do, et cetera, et cetera. I will say that when we're writing, like another thing to talk about is systems here. Like I have a bunch of screens in the game, like a ton of them. Air bike, artifacts, all this stuff. But what I also have is a bunch of systems. So I have like a cloth system and a chain system. You can see the chain struct right here. I'm trying to estimate the bytes of it. That's probably not accurate. There's padding issues in there. But you'll see if I close up the chain system, it's just a constructor, a reset, update, and a draw with some extra functions here that kind of like support, that just kind of support the system. And the cloth is similar, but the updates are different. And there's a bunch of like sub methods to this that are really, really hot. So like relaxing the sheet, I'll go ahead and give away the secrets right now. For sheets, you have to relax 4 neighbors. But for chains, you only have to relax 2 neighbors. So that's why the systems are separate. So I guess to kind of jump back to this, everything is separated into systems and screens. You kind of see this over here, systems and screens. I've got a couple more, like bosses go into their own area. Looking at a boss is pretty easy. It's just a reset, update, draw, you know, very simple methods, kind of like a screen. When you look at mobs, all these mobs, they're very similar to a screen. They just have a update and a take damage function. And all these mobs live in this category here in their own mob system. So down here into mobs, you'll see that we have IDs for everything so that we can check using a mobile ID. We can spawn them, we can compare them, all that good stuff. And that's kind of like the general overview of Laser. This last part, brute considerations. Tom can talk to this a lot better than I can. Basically, I followed Tom's advice and guides and just used .NET 4.5. And there was a lot of examples that he provided that I basically copied and pasted and really used that to kind of like drive the architecture. Like the save data, for example, he was talking about saving data cross-platform. It's an array of bytes. Like that's the best way to do it. If you do it any other way, it's going to be a nightmare. And early on, he was like, this is how you should do save data. And that's exactly what I did. So I think that Tom could probably address this better. I don't know what else. I don't draw 3D models. I really just draw like sprites via sprite batch. So that simplifies things a lot too. I think that's all I have. Yeah. So any questions that would drive the presentation better would be great.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just put it into release mode.
Yeah, because I hadn't really, I knew the game, but I've never really played it or looked at it at all.
It's a cyberpunk platformer, and it has chains and cloth in it, and that was like the original selling point. But it's grown so much further beyond that. So you have presets. You can customize your character. I'm feeling kind of blue today, so we'll go with that. You can get an introduction, you can get dialogues and stuff. And it's a platformer, but it's trying to introduce new concepts like climbing on chains, sure. But I also really like looter shooters like Borderlands. So I want dungeons. I want dungeons with loot and stuff. This is the intro. This is where we learn how to fight. And this also kind of tells people you can choose different paths through the game. You can choose like the top path, which is battle, or the bottom path, which is a little bit easier. But eventually, you'll complete the intro, learn how to ride air bikes too. And once you complete all that, then you get introduced to Jada, who explains the main plot. And it's the main hero is an AI that's been stolen, and it's been given free will, and then they use the AI to fight the big corporations, Voth, Humacorp, and the Brain Corporation you see in the back. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to combine a lot of different stuff, like looters,
Wow.
shooters, and chains and cloth, and all kinds of other stuff.
How long have you been working on the game?
Oh, I've been working on this for probably 6.5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've been through a lot.
I have remade the game 3 times.
Yeah. That's what happens, right?
Yeah, there's a demo on Steam right now that has over 70 levels available, and I nuked the whole code base and kind of started over. So
Okay, so there's a demo on Steam that you can see an old version of the game.
yeah, I'd love to post a new version to Discord. I can make one right now.
Oh, cool. The so what do you? It seems like in what you were talking about, you kind of said with some of your choices. So you kind of made the game heavily screen based, and the screens are like everything, levels, screens, things like that.
Yeah.
And it seems like you also decided to kind of write your own editor instead of trying to use some third party thing.
Absolutely. I found that just being able to boot into the editor really quick and do what I need to do, like, oh, I actually need to turn release off. My fault. But yeah, writing your own editor has a lot of benefits. It's just right here. I control the code. I don't have to jump through hoops. I don't have to jump through a UI like the UI I designed here. It's really kind of intuitive. There isn't a lot of words.
Yeah, and I guess that's the benefit, right? It's like people work different ways.
Absolutely.
Instead of trying to figure out how can I bend Blender to my will to do this, it's like I'll just write something that works the way I think in how my game works.
Exactly.
That's really cool. And you're kind of pasting full entities here. It's not just art. It's an
oh yeah,
entity,
these are entities in the game code. I can just go save data, like save the level, and then we'll go look at it inside of levels. Like all the data I just added there, a bunch of hover cars.
So the editor builds code that then becomes the launch of the game.
Exactly. The editor will build a level file and will iterate over all of the pools and find what's active, and then write like these specific strings, which is the spawn method. So we bypass parsing basically.
I mean, that's a smart way to approach it, right? Because, a lot of games that we end up porting and seeing, like a lot of them, they start out simple and they're like, oh, we'll just have a data file that defines the level, and that quickly can get out of control. And then suddenly you have these gigantic XML or JSON files that take a lot of time to parse. Parsing JSON to parsing XML is slow.
And saving that too.
Yeah,
saving that data is a nightmare.
And then also debugging it. Like, oh,
yeah.
I missed a less than symbol somewhere. Where is it? Who knows? I missed a comma somewhere in this JSON file. Who knows where it is? Somehow,
exactly.
In 2026, tools to find those things have eluded us. But yeah, I mean, parsing takes time, and it does slow down your loading process. We've had to work around it several times on projects where we've recommended that, like, hey, let's write a binary version of this file so that we can stop all this dumb parsing, because especially on lower end consoles, it's spending a lot of time allocating strings and destroying strings just to read some data that you already know. So no, but writing it as code is a smart way to approach it. It will work every single time. There's no ambiguity. There's something to say about it compiles, so it must run, right? Like you don't have to I need to test the level later to make sure it parses properly and runs. It's like, well, if the code compiles, the level's going to run.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of interesting benefits to that approach. What about things like, I guess, what are you doing for things like audio, physics, things like that? Is that all kind of customized?
Well, for audio, I'm just using sound effects, so I can step into assets real quick and show you that.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's just a big list of stuff. And this is just a bunch of sound effects. If we wrap up all the regions, you can see there's a lot of sound effects. There's air bike, boss, chain, enemy, gun, hero, NPC, drone, UI, world effects.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a little bit.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. So a lot of these sound effects, when we look at like the audio system, there's a couple of sound effects I use that are loaded into the game always. And this is like when you do something bad in the game that causes a wanted level, like in Grand Theft Auto, these are police music tracks that will play. And those need to play instantly, like they shouldn't pull from a disc. There shouldn't be a pause when this happens. So these are just always loaded. And then some of the tracks are loaded dynamically using two content managers here. You have a music A and a music B. And this is so we can load in a music track and start fading it in. And then we can fade the other music track out and then just unload the content manager, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like you would think there'd be a better system for doing that, but it totally works this way. I believe some old XNA examples talked about like, well, how do I load a level and unload an old one and transition and not break everything? It's like, well, use two content managers, which is totally valid. There's not any inherent overhead to doing that. I've seen games that have a content manager per level, essentially, and then have some third content manager for common stuff that is always loaded. So that's a good use of the existing API.
I was going to ask, with the UI, is that all your own custom, or are you using something like GUM or anything like that?
Let's talk about that. And to do that, I'll need to use Photoshop real quick. So let me look at the assets. Let me find a good atlas to look at real quick. Yeah, dialogue will do it. Okay, this is a dialogue sheet. Oops, no, let's do that. If we look into this dialogue sheet, you'll find this is organized a bit. It's got all the languages set up here. So you have like English, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and French. So all we're doing, this is an entire sprite. And I'm just drawing that. And then in order to translate it, I just move it down a frame and move it down a frame. So if we want to see this in game, here, I'll show you how this looks in game. Go to artifacts real quick. Yeah, so like that's a sprite, that's a sprite, that's a sprite, that's a sprite. And as I press these buttons, we're just iterating through those wireframes. So that way I can see that everything draws correctly, because there's an issue with Chinese text. If you have a CSV file and you translate everything in the CSV file and it looks good, right? That CSV file uses a specific font. And if you use a font that's different in game, then these characters won't necessarily translate correctly. You might get boxes with X's through them. So I do it this way so I can go through and I can check every Chinese, Japanese, Korean translation and make sure that I don't have missing characters. It is laborious, but it's necessary.
And you've not found a way to automate it, or?
The problem is I have to check the characters visually.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At a pixel scale too. It's not as forgiving as like a larger font.
Yeah. Localization people omit till the very end when they realize how difficult it is.
Yeah. I tried to tackle all those problems early and come up with good solutions, but
are you using a service to do the translations? Dean was just asking. online?
I was using a service to do the translations, but it's actually cheaper and faster to just use Google Translate.
Sure. And someone else, hold on, where was it? I'll put it on screen so it appears.
Sure.
Laser is looking better than ever. Releasing this year? Question mark.
I hope so. I hope so.
By assumed Sam is asking if it's releasing, when it's releasing, basically.
I mean, I would hope so, but probably not because I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
That's just the most honest answer.
Yeah. I mean, you're suffering through the common thing with indie developers that, it's kind of hard to let go of your baby. And if your baby's not perfect, you don't want to let it out.
Exactly.
It happens. And if you have the luxury of doing that, for sure, do it. I've definitely run into situations with some, working with publishers and porting games where we started to port a game, then we paused and then came back to it, a year or two later when they were ready to really release. I've had times where a publisher came to us and said, like, yeah, we're telling the developer he has to ship this year, and they force their hand. But if you're an indie, you kind of control your own fate. You can do what you want. If you're in that position to kind of perfect it, you can perfect it.
I hope that's the position that I'm in, and I hope I can take the time to perfect it because I want to make good games. I don't want to make forgettable games.
No, I mean, this thing looks fantastic.
Thank you.
Agreed.
I think it's going to do really well. Let's see. I guess. Do you have any other questions, or do we have any more questions from the?
I'm having a look
viewers?
through the viewers.
Sure.
There doesn't seem to be any.
Let's ask some more questions, guys. Maybe he's got one. Even if it's stuff about MonoGame stuff, about the the release and everything else.
I'll ask. So, as a perfectionist, how much more do you think there is left then?
50%.
Wow,
Infinite.
50%. Yeah, well, you have to.
There's 119 levels right now, and there's probably going to be like 400 at the end.
Oh wow! So, how long? I mean, probably a very open-ended question. How long does each level take? Would you say, depending on I suppose ability?
You just keep revisiting and redesigning the levels, and they keep getting better, and that's a problem.
Yeah. Every time it gets better, it makes you think, well, if I wait a little longer, it'll get even better.
So some levels take a really short period of time. Like if I'm doing a dungeon, I can just kind of draw the lines out and gray box it real quick to make sure all the mechanics work. And then I can put the skin on it later. And that's a really fast process. I've found that the levels that take the longest are streets. Like if we boot into any street, Olive Street's a good one. Yeah. I just boot into a street. There's so many different buildings that need to exist on this street. And there's also dungeon entrances that need to exist on this street. So like with Olive Street, for example, there's a club here called Tech Noir. Mm-hmm. There's an interior that leads to all kinds of hidden stuff. And this isn't even finished, really. It's just like, I know that this goes here.
Sure.
And then I go in and I could improve all of this, but I'm happy with the way it looks. But I also get kind of sidetracked because, like, for example, here's a level that's a bathroom. Why did I make a bathroom for Tech Noir? It doesn't serve any purpose. So I gotta start asking myself, like, what am I doing? But then you go to like a dungeon and it looks great.
Sure. I mean, it's just got so much happening on the screen at the same time, and the frame rate looks pretty solid. So it's quite impressive.
And I think that just the fact that you can transition from one scene to another so quickly, I think that's a huge thing, right? Yeah. Especially if you've ever played a game that has long loading screens.
Oh, I hate that.
This is definitely much better.
Yeah, and it breaks the immersion.
Yeah, I want things to be fast. I don't want to wait. I don't like waiting.
And another question I had is, on one of the screens that you showed, it looked like it was a 3. Well, I know it's not 3D, but I was just wondering how you did that effect of rotating. I think there were several people on like a platter.
Yeah, let's look at that. That's a story spiral.
Okay, there we go.
And then I'll need to unlock some stuff real quick. All right, I should do it. So the way that this works is imagine a circle, and then imagine the hero going around the circle. And then imagine that we took that circle and we kind of squashed it on the, the up-down axis, the y-axis, or whatever. And then we just applied some really clever sorting routines to it, and that's it. Right? So we're just going around in a circle, and we're squashed a little bit to fake that perspective, and then we're just sorting things pretty much based on their y position, but there's also an offset applied so that I can control exactly what that sorting is.
Very, very sexy.
Thank you.
I like the looking at the back of the thing, blur it out in front of the camera.
Oh yeah, the depth of field.
Yes.
Those sprites I literally blurred in Photoshop. There isn't. We're not doing like depth calculations. They're just blurred sprites, and we draw them.
Right. No, it fits the style.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And there's a lot of this done. This is a lot of the levels I deleted. Like there's greens and reds up there that we just can't visit yet because I locked it.
Right.
But right now I'm working on this first act. So it's like the first 30 levels, getting the first act done, getting all of the loot and the dungeons and the bosses in order, getting all the dialogue in order, making sure that there's real world consequences at the end of Act 1 based on choices you make. There's a lot of requirements that are going into this. So that's why it takes so long.
Nice, really nice.
Oh, let me talk about one more thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've got time.
So these screens, you can use the screens to divide up game state, but you can also use screens as tools. So one thing I want to show right here, when I need to render levels, like I want to look at a whole level and I want to check it and be like, does everything look right? So this is my folder where I have all the levels rendered. I'm just going to delete them all real quick. And then I'm going to step over here. There's a screen called Render All Levels, and I'm going to boot into it. And what it's going to do is load each level, render it, tell me how long it's taking, and where it's putting those levels. So it's rendered, 20 some odd levels. So let's go look at that folder again. So I'm using the screen as a tool. This isn't an external, like I'm not booting up Visual Studio in another project. This is just a screen in the game. So you can use screens to also, you can use them as like tools, if that makes sense.
Explain a bit more.
Well, like I want to check and make sure that the levels are correct. So like I need to be able to like zoom in and be like, are all these holograms right?
Sure.
Is everything placed properly? And in order to do that, I need to render out all the levels. And there's 119 levels in game right now, and I don't want to do that by hand.
Of course.
So what I do instead is create a screen called Render All Levels. Look at that now. And then here's a list of all the levels it's going to render. And then once we get into the update, what you're going to find is we're just going over these levels, we're loading them, we're updating the UI, and then we're rendering them.
Nice.
And this just renders them to a PNG using that texture 2D,
Brilliant.
So we can use screens as tools too.
Really good.
And that's actually how I built the editor. The editor is all built out of screens as well.
Oh, excellent. And what would you say is the hardest thing that you've worked on? And what have you most enjoyed working on?
Collisions is the hardest. Like chasing down all the edge cases with collisions is crazy. I think there's still an edge case in the game where if the hero's hitbox collides perfectly with a corner, it'll get stuck. And I need to address that at some point.
Yeah.
The funnest thing is seeing it come together. Like seeing air bikes make like particle effects and make sounds. Just watching it come together, because like these air bikes used to look really bad and sound really bad. So like as I see things improve, I'm like, oh, that's what I love. That's what I'm kind of like searching for, making things better.
Right.
Yeah. As a fan of the development process over the years, I've really enjoyed watching it improve over the years. So it's been really good.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Somebody asked, let me see here. This is from Christopher Hanna. This is sick. Are you doing any regressions? Not
Okay,
sure.
so we write to a repo. We write the commits to a repo. There is no testing done programmatically. It is all done by hand. So when a regression happens, it usually happens when I'm trying to record something and I go, oh crap, and then I got to go figure it out. So
Right.
no, we're not doing any regressions.
Yeah, that happens. That happens. Almost, every indie game I've worked on, hasn't had any sort of unit testing or regression tests of any kind.
It's hard to move fast and also write tests.
Yeah, and I've had to retrofit tests into games in the past to just make it easier, especially with really big games, to make it easier to do things like having a smoke test to just make sure every level loads, and doesn't crash on load up. That content is available, that it needs to be there. Back when one of the first games that we ported to console was Towerfall, if you remember Towerfall.
Yep.
And we added in an update. No, it was on Vita. Yeah, it was on Vita. No, originally it was on PS4. On PS4, when we did it originally, we had some stability issues with it. And what we did is we wrote a small little dumb AI that, all it did was kind of move players left and right and jump and shoot in random directions. And we would launch the game over the weekend with it, doing that with it would launch a level, it'd launch a random level, spawn 4 players, and it would run that AI that would just jump and bounce around and shoot random directions, and those levels were all timed, so it would end, and just let it run hundreds of games over a weekend in order to verify that it was stable, that it wasn't crashing, that it was running out of memory and things like that. And that was really useful. And then later, when we did a Vita port of the game, we wanted to add some multiplayer, so you could play between 2 Vitas. So we wrote a serialization system and everything else, and that same AI came in handy for testing that worked by running it on both sides. So sometimes you don't really write unit tests. You might write kind of test scenarios that kind of exercise the code. Sometimes you really need to test everything together and not just individual unit tests. But I have seen, some games that have unit tests at some level for something. But for the most part, everybody just kind of writes a smoke test, or just kind of depends on testers to test it. But for big games, having some sort of strategy to make sure that your one simple change did not break the entire code base isn't a bad idea. But but most games just do not have the manpower or the time to do that. You're kind of focusing all your time on creativity.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. I did try and do something like that with input recording and input playback, but indeterminism and trying to make this work across different platforms drove me insane. So I just gave up on it.
Yeah, it'll do that.
A question from Square Bananas saying, and I was going to ask about this as well. It looks like you're a huge fan of static.
Thousands, probably.
Are you using any sort of like class hierarchies, or is everything fairly flat?
It's fairly flat. I'd say that the only inheritance I use is in screens. Like if you look at a screen, it's going to inherit from a base class. So we have like a minimum contract to fulfill with, open, close, handle, input, update, draw. And these are just bonus methods for that. But yeah, that's the only real inheritance in the game. Just screens.
And one other question, again from Christopher, which was the screenshots. Are the screenshots checked in as well? And do you use like a bisect to do like a visual diff?
No, I don't. I don't check in the screenshots for checking levels to see if they're right, because it's just a bunch of noise in the repo. I also don't save raw sound effects or raw music in the repo because that just bloats up the repo size and makes it unwieldy. That's all backed up to 2 external hard drives whenever major updates are done.
Fair enough.
Yeah, they're duplicated across the hard drives.
And a question from me: when it's done, what platforms are you looking to release on?
So here's the thing. Sprite Batch, all of the platforms that Sprite Batch work on.
Nice.
So everything.
Everywhere.
Because that's the only thing I'm really tied to. That's the dependency of MonoGame, is the input and sprite batch and audio.
Right. No, that's great. I mean, having something that portable, I guess the one limitation is input devices, right? I guess playing on a phone is a little bit tricky, but it can be solved.
It can be. So with the input, I abstracted all game input into this game input struct, which is just A, B, X, Y, start, and a direction. So as long as we can map the input to this struct, the game just operates on the struct. And I mapped the controller and I mapped the keyboard, and so everything just works on that.
Cool.
Nice. Very nice.
So hopefully it makes it a little bit easier to add different kinds of input later on.
Okay, are there any more questions from the community?
Let's see.
I've tagged some questions for post game demo.
Yeah, hit me with answers or questions. I'll give you answers.
Or just any question you have.
Okay, so somebody asks, this is not necessarily a question for Garrick, but I mean, obviously feel free to jump in. Is MonoGame good for 3D?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that keeps you from using MonoGame for 3D. If you look like on our showcase page, you'll find several different 3D games that have shipped with MonoGame. It's the deal with MonoGame in 3D is mostly that it takes more work in its commitment, to get it to work. Sprite batch is super easy because 2D is super easy. And, you just have an image, you say, draw it on the screen here, you rotate it, you move it. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically just one image and it kind of draws the geometry for you. It's when you get into an animation is basically changing that image or moving that image. It's very, very straightforward. 3D is like, okay, well, it's one more dimension, but it's vastly more work. And that's just shown in everything. So, while things like Unity and Unreal and Godot make it fairly easy to do 3D because their engine's already built around very specific limitations on what they support for animation and model formats and things like that. We kind of give you a blank slate. And even our sprite batch is really 3D. It's just a 2D element, that's drawn with a camera flat, but you can move the camera around. If you look at like the I guess it's the shader tutorial that's up on the site now. It shows you how to manipulate the shaders to show the sprite batch in 3D and move things around. Like everything is possible there. It's just a matter of your determination to do it. The Ascent demo is something we're working on to kind of do a higher end 3D demo to kind of show how it works. And the idea is that the Ascent demo will eventually be kind of a starter kit that you can use to kind of, hey, I'm going to create a new project based on the Ascent demo, and then I'm going to start modifying it. So I have a starting point of a good 3D starting point. That's the same thing with and we didn't talk about it today, but the 3D platformer demo, that Kenny's 3D platformer demo for MonoGame, we're going to release that as a starter kit, and you'll be able to just go and start from there. And it gives you a starting point of a 3D game that you can start to modify. If you like what it's doing, but you want to change how it jumps or want to change the perspective or do something different with it, you can totally do that. So I think giving you good starting points so that you can kind of iterate from there is the important part to making 3D more viable in MonoGame. Just because it's not that it's not doable, it's just that it takes some effort. You have to kind of know what you're doing and figure it out, because there's a lot to it. 2D is so much more simpler than 3D than you imagine. The fact that that you can kind of build it yourself kind of just opens up a lot of possibilities for how you want to do it. And we've seen lots of different games that approach it in different ways, not just the cookie cutter way that the big engines want to provide to you. The other benefit is that you have all the benefits that you saw here with Grax game here, is that you can kind of build your own tools the way that you want them. and for them to work the way that you want them. You don't have to say, well, how do I make, Unity or Unreal do this thing that I want it to do to make it easy to edit my levels or design my game. So there's some benefits to kind of rolling your own system. And we do plan to enhance MonoGame beyond the API that's there. There's been a long standing discussion about, like, can we get 3D animation into MonoGame as a first-class citizen in there. There's been talk about, well, is there an equivalent to a sprite batch for 3D? And it's like, sort of, kind of, but it's not going to solve the problem. The core reason 2D and 3D are so different is because 3D is vastly more complicated. One more dimension adds, it's a exponential change to how much work you have to do to make it function. And it's definitely a challenge, but it's totally doable. Several teams have shipped 3D games using this. We've shipped 3D games using it. The Ascent demo shows it. We just want to make it easier for people to jump in there. I think between the new 3D starter kits that we're working on and just the new resources site that we have that shows kind of like just third-party resources that you can use, 3D physics engines, collision systems, 3D audio systems, things like that will make it easier for you to jump in and do 3D without having to write everything from scratch yourself, but just kind of piecing together the elements that make it the way that you want it to be. So yeah, 3D is totally viable.
Excellent. Simon had a question of, can you talk more about Brute, what it is and what it is for, just so that people who don't know about it?
Yeah, so Brute was something that we developed here at our studio. I guess we started it a long time ago. So what Brute is a cross compiler. It takes C# code, not C# code, but a C# assembly, and generates C++ code that can then be run on various platforms. I wrote it originally because back in the day, we were trying to ship, I guess it was Towerfall originally. Yeah, we wanted to ship Tower. In fact, yeah, it was Towerfall was the beginning of it. So I think that was the first title. It could have been Towerfall. It could have been Axiom Verge. I forget which one, but one of those. Actually, no, I think it was maybe Salt and Sanctuary. We wanted to ship it on Vita, and Vita didn't have a C# solution. There was no Mono for Vita or anything like that. So we reached out to the Mono team, Xamarin at the time, and they're like, sure, we can make a version of Mono that runs on Vita. Let's talk. We'll talk to Sony and we'll work it out. So Xamarin and Sony started talking about things, and they started throwing back and forth how many millions of dollars it was going to take to build C# for Vita. Because, Xamarin was a smaller company, and they were looking to, make some money, and Sony had money. So they were trying to figure out a solution, and there was a lot of arguments back and forth. While that was happening, I had gone to GDC that year, and I got a closed door demo of the beginnings of Inscription that converts, or was it Inscription? Yeah, that converts C++ code to JavaScript. And they had a demo they were running that was Unreal Engine 3. I think it was Unreal Tournament running in a browser. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And then, sometime after that demo, I was thinking, if they can convert C++ code to JavaScript, why can't it convert C# code to C++ code and solve my portability of C# games to console? Because I was just tired of waiting to see what was going to happen. I was like, what can I make a solution? I thought, oh, no problem. It'll take one weekend. I'll just write a cross compiler and it's done. Well, here we are, at least a decade later, and I'm still working on cross compilers from C++ or from C# to C++. So that was how it started, and it was started originally for porting to Vita, and then eventually we've gotten it to support on all the consoles, and that's one of the paths to console that you can take at this point. There's some other solutions now, and sometime after that, Unity came up with their cross compiler, their IL to CPP, which is the same sort of concept, and there's a couple of others that are out there. Microsoft now has their thing that is native AOT, which is their implementation that doesn't create code. It actually literally takes the IL assembly and writes machine language out for each platform, itself. And while that's really good and fast, and it works as good as any version of .NET, it supports the latest versions of .NET. It can't be used everywhere for dumb reasons that I can't get into the details of. So it still makes Brute sort of a viable path. And Brute as well takes a lot of shortcuts. Like because I wrote it specifically for porting games, there are a lot of things that it does that .NET doesn't do. Like I can optionally say I don't need null checks in my code because I would rather it crash when it hits a null than throw an exception. I can say, hey, don't do boundary checks on array access. Because if we reach out of bounds on an array, that's fine. Let it crash because it shouldn't be doing that in the first place. And I'd rather have it crash and be fast than for it to throw an exception that I'm not going to handle and be slow. So there's some optimizations we did in the implementation. So the biggest problem with Brute at the moment is that it is still stuck in, old .NET framework era, because of where it was written. So once Microsoft moved to .NET Core and modern versions of .NET, it kind of fell behind. And that's something that we've been needing to spend more time on. More recently, there's been a push to get an updated version of Brute that works with modern .NET, and that's something that I'm working on actively. But it's been a slow process. Again, I thought, an update to that would just take a couple weekends, and I'll be done with that. I'm not going to make the same mistake as before. No, same problem. It's going to take a lot because .NET has changed so much since back then. It's kind of incredible how much has changed and how much of the core Brute has to be rewritten to make it work. But we're making it work because as much as we've had, as much as native AOT is really good, there's some benefits to Brute with some performance optimizations and things like that I think are still viable. And also, we always need a solution for when, and this is why I wrote Brute, is like I need a solution for when another version of .NET does not exist for the platform. There's always a platform that just doesn't have .NET, and for whatever reason, legal or technical or whatever, you can't run native AOT. So how do we get there? And that's still why I think Brute is viable. My intent was always to open source it, but I never did because there was some platform specific code in there. It spooked me into open sourcing it, but I still plan to open source it one day, maybe once it's totally not viable and nobody needs it. But I plan to open source it at one point. But yeah, it's still a viable thing. And that's basically what a lot of the console games like Stardew Valley and Celeste and Axiom Verge and all those things are running on Brute on consoles. So that's basically what it is, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Brilliant overview.
Full story.
Actually a question for Garrick, if hopefully you're still around.
Yeah. I'm still around.
Do you have level specific asset segregation in your assets repository file?
What's an asset repository file? I have a bunch of PSD files.
Okay, we'll probably need some clarification from John then.
They probably just mean like, the repository, just, where you store your content.
Okay, so there's an assets folder. Can we step up? This is basically the repo. There's the Git file. These are excluded, like music and sound effects are excluded. Level rendering is excluded. My suite contracts are excluded, same marketing. But inside of the assets file, it's really just a bunch of PSD files. Like there's all of the assets that I am using, and there's like hundreds of them, And I just checked those into a repo. All these are under 50 megabytes, so they don't throw any errors or anything.
Oh, great.
Nice. And I will also go through and like remove and delete them too, because sometimes they get old and they're not used and they go back into the backup file in case I need to use them again.
Right.
But I need to keep this directory somewhat clean with files that are actively being used in Laser and not like art that's just hanging out,
Yeah, and that happens.
Fair enough. Yep.
You'll end up shipping, a couple hundred megabytes of data that you don't really need.
Exactly. Like this is kind of like a source file that just has a bunch of different art in it that I can pull from at any time I want. And it's also a place where I kind of do mock-ups before I choose to like put them into an atlas, you know? So I also have these files, but those aren't used in the game really.
Sure.
But they're very necessary for development, so I keep them around.
Fair enough. A couple more questions before we close up shop, as it were. This is I think this might be for Tom. Is Windows GDK in the works?
I guess it's technically there. I mean, the implementation that we have, I mean, I don't know. I still have trouble understanding what GDK is, because there's not like the GDK API. There is a GDK, which is a conglomeration of different APIs that they're calling GDK. So we use DX12, so that's part of GDK. We use OpenAL, or not OpenAL, sorry, Xaudio 2. That's part of GDK. Currently, the windowing system is SDL, and we use SDL as well for inputs. But SDL does have support for GDK APIs, so it kind of puts a gray area there. I don't know if we want to have a pure, because Windows games can, even if you're in the Windows Store, can use SDL, can use these things. I don't know if it's worth having a different Windows build that doesn't use SDL, that targets just GDK APIs, so pure Win32, the native gamepad APIs from Microsoft, and not using SDL to do gamepads. I don't know if it's worth doing that. Obviously there's other things there, like achievements and save data and things like that are at the moment are a little bit outside the boundaries of MonoGame, but we want to improve those things over time. But I think GDK is totally viable. I think that what's there is enough to make a GDK build. Like, you could ship a game using the native DX12 backend, the new Windows DX12 platform, and make it run on GDK, and you'd be fine. It would just take a little bit of effort, but we'll try to lower the barrier for that. But I think the Windows DX12 build will be essentially the GDK build at some point, because it's less about like it's using GDK to it's using the elements that GDK needs, and it's really up to your game to build and package things the way that you need for GDK. So, or for a GDK release, like Windows Store release.
Okay.
So hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, fair enough. We've only got two more quick ones, hopefully. Can you say on what platform there's problems with native AOT?
No, because I don't want to throw anybody on. No, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. So
fair enough. Okay.
I can't talk about it, but yeah, there's platform, there's places where we can't use it, and that's that's an issue. But it'll get solved eventually.
Nice. Okay, let's move on to the last one. Has a deadline been set for integrating a possible visual editor for the new content builder?
I think there's no plans for visual editor for the new content builder. In a way, it's very much like Greg was showing us here with his levels. Like it's basically a CS file that has a bunch of code in it, on how to build content. So it definitely is something that is trickier to write a visual tool for. And even then, like, I don't know how much of a visual tool you really need. Like, originally that MGCB tool, the visual editor tool, originally started as a tool that I had built for a different project to just make it easier for our art team to integrate content into a game. And eventually I donated it to the MonoGame project and started to enhance it for that. And that's where it all originally started. And the idea was like, well, we'll have plugins and you'll be able to preview textures and preview models and preview things in there. and we'll have ways to be able to diagnose issues and get statistics about your build, like, you know, how big your content is and how big content is on textures versus models. And, you know, on this platform, the content is this big, on this platform, it's that big. There was a lot of ideas of statistics and ways to just make it a more mature content build, content pipeline, you know, and, you know, supporting real-time loading of content so that you can, you know, you can not have to exit your editor or your game in order to get a content update, distributed content builds. There was a lot of big ideas at the time, but those kind of all went to the wayside. They never materialized. So the editor just have a lot of functionality. It's basically just putting together a list of files to build, you know. So in the case of like Ascent in the new 3D platformer demo, it shows that, you know, it's basically, you know, one function with less than, you know, 100 lines of code that says, build these files like this, build these files like that, build these files like this, build these files like that. You don't really need a visual editor. Your visual editor is Visual Studio or VS Code or whatever that lets you open up that builder CS file and just edit the lines that you want to change to however you want to change it. So at this point, I don't see any real need for a visual editor. I think that there might be a need for us to maybe make a starter kit that has something that's a little bit, you know, more elaborate, like a, you know, I guess the Ascent demo kind of has that. It has its own built-in editor, and making interesting uses of the new content builder, you know, so that you can see like this is how you integrate something like this into your game and make the most of it. But I just don't see that we're going to be doing like a visual editor at the moment. But I could be wrong, you know. We'll see when we finally get the thing fully working, you know, whether it makes sense to take the next step there for some sort of visual editor.
All right. Looks like we're out of questions. So don't forget to, obviously, if you like what you're seeing, to donate to the MonoGame Foundation. Everything goes towards the team trying to make MonoGame better. We're a non-profit, so none of us are making millions out of this. But yeah, do support us. Don't forget that tomorrow we have Simon on his MonoGame University stream, where he's, I believe he's still covering the new content pipeline. So if you want to know more about that, watch the stream tomorrow. And obviously on Friday, Tom will be doing some more work on Ascent, which is shaping up really nicely.
Yep, it's getting there.
And I believe that's all. Thanks everyone for joining us. Join us next week. Sorry, next month even.
Next month even. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Derek for the great demo. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.